Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Travis. Travis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Travis, I'm excited for the subject today. I think it's extremely relevant to literally everyone listening to this podcast. But before we dive in, Travis, let's get to know you. Tell us a little bit about your background and work history.
So currently I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Communications Officer at Strada Education Foundation. We really focus on connecting education with opportunity, especially economic opportunity. I've worked at the intersection of policy and communications for more than 30 years, and I've toggled between policy and communications, but it's really all been about how do you market ideas? How do you take, particularly reform, how do you take from where we are and move people to really embrace what could be next?
I love that. And I love that you have such this holistic background and this vision and you're helping people. I think that's so fulfilling and so cool. I'm excited to have you on the podcast today. So I really do appreciate it. So for the subject today, what we're going to talk about, and I love this title, don't swing at every pitch, staying strategic when everything feels urgent. Okay. So when we talk about urgency, we kind of have these two contrasting ideas, reacting versus responding. What are your thoughts on like how to, respond as opposed to react, and when do we do what, and how do we kind of not focus on the urgency? What does that look like in your opinion?
It's a great question, and I'm always guided by some advice that a wise mentor gave me a long time ago, which is the difference between reacting and responding is pause. And that pause can be 5 seconds, it can be 5 minutes, it can be 5 days, it can be 5 weeks, but it gives you the chance in that moment, whatever that moment is, of pause, to really ask yourself and your team and your organization some really critical questions. How does this affect us? How does this reflect our brand or impact our brand? How does this show up or resonate or not resonate with our core audiences? And so a couple of things that I always try to introduce into the moment of pause, again, however long or short that is number one, what's our brand? Our organization really just recently went through a brand refresh, and we adopted 5 core attributes that include things like optimism and humility and agility. And so it's always coming back to what in this moment is calling out those things, or how do we position relative to those things? So being faithful to your brand is one key part of that pause moment. I think the other key part of that pause moment is know your numbers. Know where your audience is, know what works with them and what doesn't work with them, what's going to resonate, what really appeals to their emotions and values, and take those data, so to speak, together and really reflect. One of the things that we've done in our organization is really try to develop a rubric or a triage where we say, okay, there's business as usual. There is a situation that may come up that may require some kind of different action than we would ordinarily take. And then there's crisis. And it's like, know the difference. And so the first thing you do in the moment of pause is say, is this business as usual? Is this a situation, or is this a crisis? And then how does it relate to our brand and what we know about how we perform?
That's cool. I love the pause concept. I have never heard that quote before, and that makes perfect sense. I love that. It's just putting meaning and strategy back into everything. I love that. That's so cool. So I think a lot of people do resonate and say, yeah, there's a lot of things that can kind of rush at us and they can distract us. How do you kind of start to know and see the signs that your team is starting to chase headlines and trends maybe a little too often? What are some of the signs that you kind of pick up on?
So I think there are some analytical signs, or some empirical, some data signs. And then there's more what I call like the emotional intelligence signs, the less quantifiable things, I guess is a better way to put it. And I think when you get to the quantifiable side, one of the things that we are not alone, obviously, in doing is looking at our numbers, especially around engagement. Eyeballs and ears are fine, but what do people do with what you put into the world? And so what I look for when I look at trend reports, and I look at them monthly, quarterly, sometimes even weekly, is what's landing and what's not. And for me, a sign that we may be a little off focus or off center is if we're putting things into the world that people aren't necessarily reacting to. And I think that also relates to your brand. People associate you with a certain set of issues or a certain product or a certain idea. And when they see things that don't seem to fit together, they kind of check out. So I think that your numbers start to tell you some things, and they can be leading indicators and they can be lagging indicators. I think the other thing is just from the non-quantifiable is just you can feel stress. You can feel when you're looking at, and this is where the quantifiable and the non-quantifiable intersect, is you look at how am I spending my time? If I look at my week and out of a 40, 50, 60-hour week, I'm spending all of my time responding to emails, jumping into stand-up meetings, that tells me that I am not getting the time to pause, as we talked about a moment ago.
I love that. That's incredible. I love that. So, how do you know what to engage with versus what is kind of just noise? That's such a hard filter to have. How do you manage that?
It's the first person to say it's not easy. One of the things that we've tried to develop in our organization is a framework of sorts for how do you triage? How do you distinguish, like I was mentioning earlier, between a situation and a crisis and an opportunity? Let's also include the positive side. And we've tried to land on some criteria like proximity. How close is this? We've got a core set of focus areas that we really emphasize, like the affordability of education, like the ability of a student to get an internship or apprenticeship, like their ability to get good career coaching. How close is whatever is coming across the plate, to use the analogy, is that to our core set of issues? And then there's also the question of urgency. Is something happening, is something developing in a state or here in Washington that really something good could happen that you really want to you really want to push, or something bad is happening that you really want to try to pivot? Get a good read of how urgent is this and understand the impact. If X happens, what Y will result? What will happen to our mission? What will happen to our partners? So there's a host of criteria that you really, but again, it all gets back to this pause. You have to take a moment just to square what's in front of you with where, in fact, you really sit.
I love that. That's cool. I like the filter. I like how you look at that. And I love how you kind of know, okay, and I don't play baseball and I'm a real big novice, but I'm going to try to take this analogy way too far. There are pitches sometimes that may technically be a strike, but it's just not your pitch. And it's just not something you should be swinging at because you know it's not your pitch that you can hit. I think that makes perfect sense. That's awesome. Any experiences you guys have had where you kind of had this opportunity and you've decided, okay, you know what, this could be cool, but it's just not for us. It's not for us. We're just going to let this one go by.
Well, I would say that we're living in the moment right now where you have a new administration in Washington, you have new administrations in a number of our states. You have, as we've seen, just a flurry of activity. I mean, like I said, I've been in this world for 3 decades, and this pace is something really new. And I think to really keep coming back to this central point, really the biggest challenge is to take the pause, but the biggest need is to take the pause. And so, whether you talk about, should there be a US Department of Education, or should colleges do this or do that? There's so many things that people might look to an organization like ours and say, well, what do you think? And for us, it's really important to say we are laser focused on ensuring that every American has the opportunity to get to the next place. Whatever the structures might be, whatever might play around, we are the yardstick that we're using to decide things is this helping more people advance into a career, or is it not going to do that?
So what I love about what you're talking about right now, it sounds like your goal and your mission, it helps you understand not only what kind of, what's noise versus what's really opportunity to kind of address. Your audience looks to you for a specific point of view, and you can add more of a why give more context, give more value. And it sounds like that goal and mission also helps in how you respond. Like, I love that you just talked about giving everyone opportunities to get to the next step. So, do you find that that also makes it easier when you're commentating on stuff that's like brand new trends, brand new opportunities, where you're like, you know what? We have a really cool opportunity here to share a why about why this is important, why people should pay attention to this, and how you kind of actually write content and get that news and mission out there?
I think so. I think that the challenge can be at times is some of the things that we deal with are pretty complex. And so from a communications and marketing perspective, the balance that you have to strike is simplify without oversimplifying. If you oversimplify, you can really run into problems with people misinterpreting or bringing in their own perspectives that aren't quite, they can be at odds with what you're really trying to accomplish, but you don't want to leave it so complex that people just leave it behind. And so, the thing that we wrestle with all the time is how do we strike that balance where we can really inspire people and educate people, but do it at a pace and using language that they are resonant with. One of the real challenges that we face in this environment is sidestepping trigger terms. Especially when we talk about whether it's diversity or we talk about opportunity, it's like, okay, well, that means, it can be loaded in different circles. And so and that's where you get back to knowing your numbers. Test your messages, know on a real-time basis what people associate a term like opportunity with.
I love that. Plus, I like how you talked earlier about the qualitative side of things, because you may have high engagement, but if you're using a trigger word, that engagement may be going off in the wrong direction. And I like how you have that filter there as well.
Right.
Okay, one final question, because we're running out of time. These episodes go super quick. There's a lot of noise, a lot of things going on. Like you said, you've kind of built this filter. You know what you should really engage with, what you should kind of let kind of go by the plate. How do you progress your message in an environment where it feels like every day there's this new pitch, new opportunity, new everything is changing all the time? How do you keep consistency and progress your mission and your voice amongst the noise?
I think it comes down to really three things. One, and I'm going to go back to this, is being really faithful to your brand, is to really living that and having that shared understanding of what those brand attributes are, and always holding up whatever content you're advancing against those brand attributes and say, are we staying consistent, and presenting a consistent face to the world? I think the second piece is, again, it's getting back to know your numbers, learn, experiment with different types of content and then learn from it and know, like, we've learned a lot about video content. It's not all good. Some of it's better than others. There are certain aspects of it that we really are trying to lean into, for example. So it's really pairing the brand and the numbers. I think the third thing that's really important is to keep your eyes open for the pivot. There are things that are flying around that are adjacent to your brand and to your audiences that can bring you into the moment, because none of us want to be missing the moment, but we also want to do it authentically. And so it's looking at, I call it engineer the pivot. How do you say, okay, this thing is going on out in the world and it is related to the topic of opportunity. Let's explain to our audiences how these two things are connected and why it matters to us.
I love that. I love that. So now you're creating these associations that people will pay attention to. I love that. That's awesome. Travis, we have run out of time. This is amazing. We always like pick these little snippets at the beginning that are sound bites to kind of do these previews. And honestly, I've got like a dozen in my mind from this episode from what you've said. So you made it real hard on me to pick one, but I'm excited for it. It's going to be fun. Travis, if anyone wants to connect with you online and further the conversation, how and where can they find you?
Well, if you go to our website, you can go to strada.org and learn more about us. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
Love it. Perfect. Well, Travis, again, thank you so much for the time and insights today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.